Hi, Matthew.
Hello. Alright, one sec. Oh, wait. It is pretty sure it's recording. Yes, it's recording. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Is that a microphone you've got there?
Yes, one sec.
That's intense.
Okay. So, for the recording, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I can introduce myself. My name is Hannah Morford. I am the manager of teaching and learning with the Baltimore Symphony's Orchids program, and I also teach at the Peabody Preparatory.
Okay, thank you. So, my first question is, why do kids join Orchids?
I think students get involved in orchids for a number of reasons. We have students all the way from pre-K through 10th grade, so there's a huge range of ages. And students in the younger years get involved because we have programming during the school day. So anyone in pre-K through second grade at many of our schools automatically are enrolled in orchids. The after-school program is slightly different. Often parents like to have their students take part in it because it's an opportunity for them to learn an instrument, to play music. I think a lot of parents also hear about it through the community and through other parents. And it's an opportunity for students to kind of develop their own sense of community and friendships. And I think as students become more involved in the program, they get more and more involved, and the more they grow on their instruments, the more opportunities they have. So we take students on field trips to different programs across the country. We have students going to LA this year. Students just got back from a trip in Connecticut. And in these visits to other programs, students have the opportunities to be leaders, to learn new skills, to learn different types of music, to participate with other students and that are playing at a really high level. We also have students who are going to summer camps as far as Interlochen, all the way in Michigan. And so I think that it's students they're not just learning an instrument, but they're also starting to learn these skills that they're able to carry into other areas of their life. So, they're learning to practice, to be disciplined, to be a responsible student, and I think that makes them stronger all around. And I think that the more those skills that they learn, the more deeply entrenched they become in the program. But I think also it's a very social place, and kids they call it like their orchids family, and they become very committed to that.
So you mentioned school programs in pre-K to second grade. Could you please explain that a little more? Thank you.
Sure. So at all of our 6 sites, we have programs that take place during the school day, and those students get general music classes. And we see that as a way of early musical immersion as well as early social intervention. So teaching students basic ensemble skills, listening skills. They're doing movement activities, they're learning to sing and developing their singing voices. It's like a general music class, so students get that through pre-K through second grade. And we do it I like to think of it as like democratic access to music, so all students in all those grades get those classes.
Thank you. My next question is, what races / ethnicities are the kids in orchids primarily, and what other ethnicities are there?
So we have students or programs on both the west side of Baltimore and the east side of Baltimore. On the west side of Baltimore, the student base is almost exclusively African American. On the east side, we have 2 sites: Highlandtown Elementary Middle 215 and Patterson Park Public Charter School. And those, I'd say at Highlandtown, it's probably 60% Hispanic, 40% African American. At Patterson Park, it's a little more diverse. I'm not exactly sure what the stats are, but it's similar to the Highlandtown breakdown as well.
Thank you. So, what races slash ethnicity are the kids in the Peabody classes primarily, and what other races slash ethnicities are there?
So the students that I work with at Peabody are predominantly Caucasian and Asian. Um, there are, a few students. I mean, as you know too, being in the
Yes.
program, right? There are a
Uh-huh.
couple students who are African American. Students in the tuned-in program, there's a large percentage of African American students, but that's not necessarily fully integrated into the rest of the preparatory string program.
Okay. And what races and slash ethnicities do you find are most dedicated in your programs in both for kids and at Peabody?
Can you define what you mean by dedicated, Matthew?
So they seem to like advance faster and also enjoy it the most.
I think that's a hard question to answer because the students in both programs aren't getting the same resources. So students in ORCIDS are learning more in an ensemble-based setting. They're not getting private lessons through ORCIDS. They're playing in group classes. So just like your group classes at Peabody where you're playing together with your friends, all of the students in those group classes at Peabody are getting private lessons where they're learning that music. In ORCIDS, the students are learning their music and their skills in their group classes. So it's a very, very different model, and it doesn't allow for as much individualized attention that would therefore lead to individualized growth. It's more centered on growth as a group and learning to play together. And students who start to excel in those group classes are then able to get scholarships to Peabody YPSP program or also to the Baltimore School for the Arts Twigs program. So it's just a different model. I don't think I can really compare the two because they're so different.
Okay. Is playing an instrument challenge like more challenging for certain kids in your programs than others? And what and who would like which programs are they in?
Is playing an instrument more challenging for certain? Are you trying to say, or are you trying to ask, is playing an instrument more challenging for a student in ORCIDS than in Peabody Preparatory?
Yes, but like playing in like if you take away the difference if in the type of learning, do you find that it's harder for certain kids, or is it kind of impossible to compare because the learning is different?
I think that a child is a child and that some students will take to violin and to music very naturally. I think that the way in which a student takes to music is different, often depending on the cultural context. So at ORCIDS, often you'd be amazed by the students, the level of their listening and ears, that they can pick something up. That actually, I often find that students in ORCIDS are less constrained by, they're not afraid to take risks, because they've never had constraints imposed on them. So at Peabody, right? I think you're probably
Yeah.
used to having to play everything a certain way and having certain standards exacted on you, right?
Yeah.
And you probably have seen in the creative workshops that students are sometimes afraid to come up with ideas or to voice their ideas, right?
Yeah.
And I think at ORCIDS, I don't see that as much. I think that we do a lot of creative work, work with the students. We do a lot of composition work with the students. They're used to playing music from all different kinds of genres, so they tend to be more versatile and able to kind of, in terms of their music making. And I think that, but then again, in any setting, some students I see in ORCIDS are naturals on their instruments and they take to it very quickly. They just have a kind of kinesthetic connection to the instrument. And you see that at Peabody too, for sure. And at Peabody, I also see students who aren't as natural, in their music making skills. So I think that I think I will also say, though, to students or kids don't have as much access to as many resources as most of the students at Peabody. And they often will face certain challenges at home, where they're just worried about basic necessities, having enough food, being safe, having a home that's secure and that's stable, and those are stressors that I don't see as much at Peabody. And so, of course, that can impact someone's learning. If you don't have enough food and you're hungry, like how can you that's going to obviously impact, your learning. So I think that it's a multi-layered question. I think learning is impacted by so many things, right? There's your innate talent, there's your the community in which you are, and then there's also the your home life and how that's impacting what you're able to do and have access to.
So, all right. So how does the different learning styles in the two programs affect the um sorry the affect I'm looking for the right word, like how much kids enjoy it and how dedicated they find to it, they are to it.
Say that one more time.
So how does the different learning styles in the different programs affect how much kids enjoy and are dedicated to each different program, to the programs at Peabody and the programs at Orchids?
Can you define what you mean by learning styles? Because I think you might mean something.
In Orchids, they learn more as a group and more creative. While in Peabody, we learn more. There's a lot more individual learning and like more limits, as like musical limits.
Again, I think that's kind of a complicated question because, what makes a student become dedicated to something? It's at Orchids, I think some kids take to it because they just love their instrument. Some students love the social aspect of it. Some students love the fact that they feel like they have a voice and that their music is speaking to them, and the culture from which they're coming. At Peabody, I don't know what makes you become dedicated to your music.
Kind of like how the music almost how what I can do with the music. So like how I could kind of put myself into it and how I could become creative with it.
And I think that's these are kind of universal concepts, right? What makes somebody why someone's drawn to music. I think it's just finding whatever kind of access point you need in order to motivate a student and to develop that a connection, that personal connection for them, whatever that might be.
Okay. So, do you think that if some kids from Orchids had kind of still grown up in the same environment but learned music the way they did at Peabody, and vice versa for kids at Peabody, do you think they wouldn't enjoy what they're doing as much?
Do you mean if we imposed a Peabody preparatory environment in West Baltimore?
Yes, and then Orchids environment in Peabody.
Well, I think that it's one important part of our program is that it's very community based. So the music we're playing is relevant to the kids and their families, and we're finding a way to incorporate what they have to say into the music making process, right? And so I think that the music that you play at Peabody is often unfamiliar to our students at Orchids, but we also play a lot of Suzuki repertoire in Orchids. So what we do at Orchids is we mix it up, right? We don't just do one thing, and I think that variety is important. So I would imagine if all we did was the type of music at Peabody that you play there, it would only appeal probably to a certain amount, right? We kind of get this mass appeal and then are able to kind of start to do music similar to what you do at Peabody, right? Once the students start to gain more skills and become more and more invested in it. But that's not the entry point with those students, if that makes sense. Because it's just wholly unfamiliar to a lot of those families, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want to impose this Western classical ideas on a community that's not, it's not what they're used to listening to. So it's finding a way to engage first and then build that shared musical connection. At Peabody, I think that we could be doing more and more of this kind of creative work and multi-genre work. Peabody, I don't know if you saw, they just put out a new statement of wanting to play more music by women composers and minority composers. So it's something that Peabody's looking at very much as well, and wanting to be diverse in their programming.
Okay. So how does the environment of the learning does the environment of Orchids appeal to kids to make them want to join or stay with Orchids?
Say that question again.
Does the environment in which kids learn in Orchids appeal to them so that they want to either stay with Orchids and continue to be in the program, or just join Orchids in the first place?
I mean, I hope so. It's something that we're always striving towards. It's never perfect. We definitely struggle with retention in some of our sites, and that's though for a variety of reasons. On the east side, we have families that are worried about getting deported right now, and families don't want to be out late at night on the streets. We have families who there's a high transient rate, so they tend to move a lot, and that's also another reason that can impact a student staying in the program. Students, sometimes if they start to struggle with their schoolwork and they're at Orchids until 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock every night. So sometimes for certain families it's too much. It's a huge commitment. Can you imagine if you went to Peabody every day until 6 or 7 o'clock? Wow. So it's not for everybody. I think that the part that draws people in is that it's joyful and that it's focused on this group music making, and it's about the process more than the product. But it's something, again, that we're always striving to have the best teachers that we can and the most engaging experience for everybody.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about reasons some kids couldn't continue in the Orchids program. Are there any other reasons? And are there any ways that Orchids is trying to appeal to those kids to get them to continue?
Mm-hmm. Another reason that we lose students sometimes now is students are starting to get older, and as you get older, students have more and more activities that they also want to take part in. And that happens in the younger years too. Sometimes students, want to play basketball, or they decide that they want to be in certain clubs after school, and it's a lot of music, and sometimes that's just not for everybody. Other reasons is the students get older, they tend to need it's a huge commitment, and they can't always keep that up. So one thing that we're looking at doing is trying to create specific schedules for the older students where they're not coming in as many days a week, and also creating specific programming for our older students we're looking more towards building leadership skills, helping prepare them for college, doing like things like music technology classes, things that are more relevant to older students. And then we're also been working on a more intentional enrollment plan where, if a student wants to enroll in the program, it's not just that they fill a form out, it's the parent has to come in and have an interview with our site staff. And our site staff go over all the different ways in which they'll have to commit to the program in order to be a part of it. So it's a multifaceted process in trying to retain students and keep our retention rate up. But it also is something that's challenging because we do go into some of the most challenged schools in the Baltimore City school system. And so there is an inevitable, it is inevitable in some ways that we will lose students just based on the communities that we're serving.
So, apart from the environment and the amazing experience, are there any other benefits for kids to join Orchid?
Well, actually, so as someone who's not a part of Orchids, are there certain things, since you've been out there before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what were there things that appealed to you about it?
Yeah. One sec. It seemed pretty like welcoming, and like the kids there were kind of willing to, like they had no idea who I was, and they were willing to like stand with me and tell me their names and all and stuff. So like it just kind of seemed like a place where people would come together.
I think that's a big part of it, is that social part that you probably kind of were able to tap into a little bit just on that one day. I think also it's, I talked to you about the trips that kids love. They get things through the program that they would never have access to normally. It's funny, some of our advanced students have come to expect that every summer they'll be going away to some big camp. And actually, had a student's dad get upset recently because his daughter didn't have a camp to go to this summer, and he was thinking, I didn't always have camps to go to when I was that age. Like, they're expensive, they're thousands of dollars, but we're providing those opportunities for those kids. So I think, that's like a huge motivating factor for students. They also do a lot of special events. I didn't really talk about that, but everything from they played at Catherine Pugh's, the mayor's inauguration event. They played at an honorary event for Carla Hayden, the new head of the Library of Congress. They played at the Ravens halftime show. They played for Roger Waters. Just huge. We play at Artscape every year, that big arts festival downtown. So we do a lot of high-profile events, and I think that the kids, they play on stage at the Meyerhoff all the time with the Baltimore Symphony. So opportunities that, like, even you probably don't even get a chance to take part in, they are getting a chance to meet all these amazing artists and play with them and play on huge stages. And I think that's also something that the students actually have come to expect at a certain, once they reach a certain level.
Okay. Are there kids who would like to do Orchids but can't because there's not enough space for them?
We do have a wait list, but I think we tend to try to make every effort we can to get, if a family or really wants their student to be able to participate, especially if the parent's pretty persistent and seems very committed. We do everything we can to make sure that they can take part in it.
Okay. Thank you. That was very informative. That was all my questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get to the heart of what you wanted?
I think I got some good information.
Okay.
All right.
Matthew, if you have other questions or follow-up stuff, you can give me a call. Just no problem, okay? You have my number. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Good luck with everything. Okay. All right, have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello again.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
All right. So, my my first new question is Orchids a unique program, or are there other similar programs in other parts of the country?
That's a great question. So Orchids is what we call, it's inspired by a program called El Sistema. Is a huge music education program in Venezuela. So there are actually many, like over 100 El Sistema inspired programs in the United States. And the main unifying, you okay?
What are you doing? What's
Is that your sister?
That's my little brother.
And so Matthew, if you could go to like El Sistema USA, it's the website with all the El Sistema programs. The main unifying factor is that it's the idea that students are studying music in an intense way, and that is teaching these students these life skills and affecting social change through their musical studies. But I think that all the programs that I've seen are very, very different. Some use more classical music, some are more community-based like ours. And so they're all different, but it's definitely not unique in the idea of using music for social change.
Okay. Do you collaborate with other teachers in other parts of the country doing these similar programs in other low resource areas?
Yeah, I do that all the time. Um, I actually did a fellowship program where I went around the country, and I was in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Alaska, in Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut. These types of programs all over the place, and it's a small field, so I've become very connected with different teachers and other program leaders doing this type of work. And I think that it's challenging work, and so creating those connections is really important in being able to better understand the challenges that we're all facing and how to do better work and pool resources together.
Thank you. So, why do you think minority and low resource kids may participate less in music programs?
So, do you know, Matthew, that there aren't music programs in most Baltimore City schools anymore?
Yeah, I actually think I read about that in the Baltimore Sun.
Yeah. So there are actually only 5 schools in Baltimore City now that have string programs at all. There are some programs that have band programs, or some schools that have band programs, but it's not that many. And it's actually very rare that you could start in elementary school and be able to follow a certain arts path all the way through high school. They don't really have these developed pathways from an elementary school all the way through high school. So, I mean, that's the majority of the reason is just access. Most students don't have access to the same musical classes and programs that like you or I did growing up.
So, do you think that if there was the availability to all students, that there would not be as much of an income divide and a racial divide in the participation of students in music programs?
So let me make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. Basically, yes, if there were music programs in most city schools or all city schools, sure, then a lot more students would be able to participate. Granted, there's a difference between participating in a public school program, right, than being able to have access to all the resources at Peabody Preparatory. But I think it would definitely lessen that inequality, the access barrier to music if they were in the public schools.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is that all?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. All right. Have a great night, okay?
You too. Bye.
Thanks.